Good morning, stringers. This is Voodoo Stick Mod back again, and today we're going to make a 5x7 stuffy. This one, 5x7, has a full fill. There will be another video for larger sizes because those have applique. I have my color stitch chart printed out, and I've made my notes. First color stop is the die line, and the color of the thread listed here is the suggested color for whatever base fabric you're going to use. The next batch of stops is all the pretty design work. The very last stitch color stop is the final stitch that's going to stitch most of the way around, leaving you a turning hole. This video is being made for any one hoop string theory fabric art stuffy. So although I'm doing the cookie badger, you might be doing a different one. It all works the same way when you have a single hoop stuffy that is a fill design. So it's a die line, all the pretty stuff, final stitch, which is before you stitch that, you're going to add your backing fabric. So what are we going to need for this? Well, we're going to need a couple of pieces of fabric. I've chosen to use Minky. It's a nice plush fabric without being fake fur, which is, you know, you can use that. You can use fake fur, you can use cotton woven, you can use flannel, you can use fleece. The only difference is that the less give the fabric has, like Minky has a little bit of stretch to it in at least one direction. So that makes turning it easier, especially in the smaller sizes. If you use a woven fabric, like a cotton you'd use for quilting, or felt, you can totally use them. It's just turning it might be a little more difficult because the fabric doesn't have the give that a Minky or a fleece would have. We're going to need some plasticky water-soluble stabilizer to put over the top. You're going to need a hoop with some medium cutaway in it. And let's see, there's my color. I'm going to show you a couple options that I have here. Okay. This is your average medium cutaway. It's a 2.5 ounce cutaway. I also have this stuff, it's called polymesh cutaway. Depending on the design, this can work, and because it's much thinner, it makes turning easier on smaller sizes. Most of Ricky's stuffies are going to call for a medium weight cutaway. Now just know, if you use something different than that, your results may vary. I'm going to give it a go with my polymesh and see how it works. Sometimes polymesh works great. Other times it just doesn't have the support that it needs. Sometimes doubling it up will help, sometimes it won't. I'm going to give this a shot and we'll see what happens. We're going to need snips, tweezers for cutting any jumps or thread tails. A pair of hemostats is helpful for turning or inserting stuffing through the opening. A dowel or chopstick or other blunt end device is good to have for poking out corners. Tape for taping things down. And you'll eventually need a needle and thread at the very end. So I am going to put this in my machine, and I'm going to run color stop 1, and then I will be back. Okay, we're back, and as you can see, I have my die line stitched. I did stitch it in a darker color than what the color stop suggested, just for purposes of video, so that it showed up easier. I'm now going to take a piece of my Minky, and Minky fabric has a nap. That means if I pet one way, it's going to lay flat. If I pet the other, it'll ruffle up. I always make my Minky lay in a way that when I pet it flat, that goes from top to bottom. I'm going to lay that down. Now you can use some sticky spray on here if you'd like, but you don't have to. Totally up to you, depending on your preferences. Then you're going to lay your plasticky water-soluble stabilizer over the top, and you can either cut this in a size that you can tape into your hoop, or you can pin it like I do. When I pin, you pin from the top because you don't want the heads of any pins to be underneath the hoop. And you just need to be careful so that when you're pinning things down, you're not putting too much pressure on your stabilizer and popping your hoop open or loosening it up. And like I said, I'm only putting the pins in. I'm not using the pins to hold the fabric in place. I'm just putting the pins in to help with the plastic topper so that it doesn't bunch up, because sometimes but when it gets started, it will kind of pull in and bunch up if it's not held in place. And I'm just going to pin it to the stabilizer in a couple of spots on the sides here, just to keep it from folding over and flopping in. So now that's all set to go. Okay, now we're going to put this back on the machine, and I want you to run all the color stops except for the very last one. Your color stop sheet may have more than mine. Just make sure to stop before you stitch the final color stop and come back and see me, and we'll do the final step of adding the backing. Okay, the pretty part is all done, and now we're going to get ready to put our back on. So I'm going to take out my pins that are holding my water-soluble stabilizer to the top, and I'm going to peel that off, and then I'm going to use my tweezers just to kind of get underneath this internal stuff. To get that off. Now some little picky parts. Okay, got all the water soluble picked off. Now I'm just going to grab my other piece of minky fabric, and I'm going to flip it pretty side to pretty side on top of here. And this is where tape is going to work just fine. So I'm going to tape these on. Now I'm going to put this back in my machine, and I'm going to run the final color stop of my stitch out. I will be back in a few minutes to show you how we turn and stuff. Okay, I am back, and I have already pulled my tape that was holding my fabric down, and as you can see, it's stitched, well, maybe you can see, it's stitched an outline, and it left an opening down here at the bottom. So I'm just going to pop this out of the hoop. So we no longer need that. And then I am going to take my rotary cutter, and I'm just going to cut away some of the excess around here, because that'll make cutting things out a little bit easier. Okay, now I prefer to use pinking shears to cut around the outside. You could use regular scissors, whatever works for you. But you want to make sure that where the opening is, you leave a bit of a tab down there that you can tuck inside when you're done stuffing it. So I'm just gonna take my pinking shears, and I'm going close to the stitch line, but not so close that I accidentally snip it. And just follow line around. And then when I get back around, I just want to make sure that I tuck that tab I gave myself out of the way so I don't snip it off. And then I'm going to grab a regular scissors, and I'm just going to add some little snips up to, but not through the stitching line, in all these little inside corners, because that's going to make it, when I turn it out, it's going to make those corners poke out easier and not look all pulled and bunchy. Now that that's done, we're going to reach in and turn this thing inside out, or right side out, I should say. So I just kind of stick my finger in and then push out the very top, and then I just kind of work it through. And this is why I say felt is not the funnest option. It works, but it is not fun to turn on these smaller sizes. For like this, the 8x12s and stuff, felt isn't that bad. But for these little small ones, it is. And now I'm just taking my finger and kind of pushing stuff out. And then I'm going to take my pokey outy tool, chopstick, blunt tool of some sort, just something that's not pointy, because if it's too pointy, it could actually poke a hole right through your fabric. And I just run it along the seam to help push out all those contours. And now we're just going to open our hole. And I'm going to grab some of my stuffing and just start feeding it in. And kind of push it up toward the ears there. And then I'll take another piece. And get it in there. And push that one up toward that other ear. This is when I find the hemostats can be helpful, because I'm just going to stick this in here and I'm just going to use it to kind of help navigate that fluff up into those outer bumps and contours. And then I can fill in behind it as I go. Okay, whoops. Let's get this bunch in. Sometimes the stuffing doesn't exactly want to cooperate with you. There we go. Start pushing that in, and then I'm going to grab my hemostats and I'm just going to help guide it up into the cheeks. And now I'm going to, now the middle is still kind of flat. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take some stuffing and I'm going to push it in around just the edge here to the feet. And then I'll come back in and fill in the center of the stuffy after I fill out both of the feet. I found that tends to work better than trying to fill everything and then squash stuff out so that it fills up the foot area. And then it's a little flat in the middle, so we'll just add a little bit more. and then you can kind of decide just how full you want it. And I usually just give mine a little, kind of like I'm kneading a ball of dough for bread or something. And then if you want it fuller, stuff fuller. If you want it a little flatter, that works too. Whatever you prefer, however much you prefer them to be stuffed. Now I'm going to tuck a little tab here. I'm going to tuck those inside so that I have a nice area to stitch shut. And I'm going to grab my needle and thread, and I'm going to sew this cookie badger shut. Now, there's a few options for stitching. You can do a whip stitch, which is just in, back, around. It's just that action, whipping the stitch around the hole. I prefer to use a ladder stitch, which is more of an invisible stitch that's often used when professional stuffies are stitched shut. Or I should say mass market stuffies. This is the kind of stitch that they would use at one of those make-it-yourself stuffed animals shops. So all you do is you start, and you're going to run a stitch parallel to the seam you want to close on one side. Okay, and it's probably about 1/4 of an inch. You want to go under parallel. Then now I'm going to go parallel on right across from it, go in parallel to the seam on that side, and pull. And this is why it's called a ladder stitch, because your stitches are like the rungs of a ladder. But except for where you go in and come out, you don't see it because it's parallel to that seam that you're closing up. Okay. Almost there. A couple more stitches. All right. That one. Okay, now I'm going to just tie this off, and I tie it off with my needle. Some people actually take the needle off and tie the thread. I've learned how to tie a knot with the needle. Okay, now that that's sewn up, what I'm going to do is I'm going to stick my needle in, and I'm going to shove it way up to the back of the stuffy. I'm going to pull tight, and I'm going to snip my threads. And what that's going to do is, since I pulled tight, those thread tails are going to get pulled back in after it springs back up. So my thread tails are buried up inside the stuffy, making it less likely that my knot's going to come undone. And that's all there is to it. You now have a 5x7 stuffy. Hopefully the instructional video helped, and if you're looking for the larger sizes that have applique, those are in a separate video, as well as the 4x4 stuffy that you could also make into a plush fob.